From Indigenous response to debate over separation, to the PM's pipeline talks with coastal First Nations, and the dialogue around accountability at Calgary City Hall. Time now for tonight's politics panel. And joining us this evening, former Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman and John Brennan, political analyst and commentator. Good evening to you both. And let's begin on the conversation we heard before the break with the University of Alberta's Matthew Walcott on the separatist referendum push and where it lands with Alberta First Nations. Chris, what does the state of dialogue around potential independence suggest about the degree to which Indigenous voices are considered in the entirety of this conversation?
Well, I'm concerned about two things. As the mayor of Lethbridge, what I learned was we were neighbors to the largest Indigenous community in Canada, the Kainai or the Blood, and you never try to speak for them. You always try to have an open dialogue with them, try to understand, and you try to be respectful to them. And I find that's not happening either from the Alberta government or from the Alberta separatists. You don't try to speak for them. You don't contradict them. If they keep mentioning their rights, I think you need to listen. And you can't tell them, no, your rights don't apply in the way that you think. I think that's insulting to Indigenous people. But I would let them speak for themselves. I don't want to speak for them. And I think they're doing that by taking the issue to courts.
Now, John, in clearing the way for the separatist petition, how much does any form of a gap in the conversation with First Nations fall on the shoulders of the Smith government?
Well, absolutely, it falls on the Smith government, Michael, because they're the ones that made it easier for the separatists to have their referendum. And it's quite clear neither the UCP government or the separatists thought to think about how this might affect Alberta's First Nations. And as a result, we now have at least two court cases coming. The Athabasca Chippewa First Nation and the Sturgeon Lake Cree First Nation have both launched legal actions against the UCP government and the separatists, saying that there's no way you can separate from the rest of Canada because we have treaty rights which precedes and predates the creation of Alberta. So, the UCP government with their legislation on the Citizen Initiative Act and then their amendments to it helped create this mess, Michael, and now we're living with it.
Chris, you've both have brought up the legal action. What are you looking for in how some of those battles over a potential referendum play out?
Well, I'm looking for a resolution. That the Alberta government is saying that really the courts are just getting in the way of what some people want and are an impediment to democracy. But if we don't have a court system providing guardrails, what kind of a system do we have? So I think seeing this go to the courts, seeing rulings happening is going to help resolve the issue. And I'm not sure how the government's going to deal with that.
All right. Next step. Well, the Prime Minister has arrived in China now for high-level trade talks. He made a stop in Prince Rupert, BC, to discuss issues, including Alberta's pipeline push with Indigenous leaders.
Coastal First Nations, along with Tlaxqualams and the Haisla Nation, oppose any project that proposed to bring oil tankers to the North Coast.
Mark Carney said it was important to meet with and hear from the group, which represents 9 First Nations, after failing to do so before signing the Memorandum of Understanding with the Alberta government on a proposed pipeline project. The PM says they discussed strengthening marine conservation while building a strong, sustainable economy and promised to fund a marine traffic risk assessment study. John, Coastal First Nations holding firm on their position, but what do you think the PM should take away from that meeting?
Well, it's a start, Michael. I thought it was a good first meeting by Prime Minister Carney with the Coastal First Nations. And the important thing that he said was, we believe in the conservation of the marine waters on the BC coast. We will work with you to make sure that they continue to be sustainable. And this is just the first step in this process. But it should be clear, Michael, and we've got the history of this with the Trans Mountain Pipeline project. The government of Canada, the Crown, has a duty to consult First Nations on any project which impacts on their lands. But the First Nations groups do not have a veto on projects. They have a right to be consulted, and it's up to the Crown not only to consult them, to do everything they can to address their concerns. And that's what Mark Carney was doing yesterday, trying to address their concerns about marine safety in the area of the coastline in the northwest BC.
Chris, while our premier is pushing for expediting a pipeline in the wake of the Venezuela situation, the Alberta government also says it's committed to working with Indigenous communities to help develop pathways to ownership and economic benefit. What do you see the Smith government needing to take away from Mark Carney's meetings on Tuesday?
Well, this is an area that's outside of the Alberta government's direct jurisdiction. It's in British Columbia. The Prime Minister is trying to make sure he's respectful to First Nations concerns and listening. I think they didn't quite get the message right in December when they went ahead and signed the agreement without consulting. And I think those people felt left out. So there's some relationship repair happening here. I think that was successful yesterday. They're on the right track. Now it's a relationship based on respect, but I don't know Daniel Smith has been quite silent, hasn't commented to my knowledge on what happened yesterday in BC. And I think it would be wise that she not openly oppose anything that's being discussed with the First Nations there.
All right, time for us to take a bit of a break, but when we come back, Calgary's water woes and the issue of accountability. More from our politics panel in a moment. Welcome back. While restrictions remain and work continues to rectify Calgary's latest water main rupture, the issue of accountability is front and center at City Hall.
The expectation from Calgarians is that City Council is going to hold our city administration to account, but also to support them in providing the resources, the culture to get that work done.
I have a responsibility to make sure that we're learning from the past, we're heeding the panel's recommendations, and we're implementing as quickly as possible so that this never happens again.
Now, on Tuesday, Council discussed a performance review of the city's chief administrative officer and also went over the recent independent panel report that found 20 years of neglect when it comes to care of Calgary's water system, including failures of communication and properly maintaining water lines. Chris, Calgary City Council met behind closed doors Tuesday evening and ended up voting in favor of changes to the review process for the chief administrative officer. As a former mayor, what do you make of how this whole dialogue around accountability has played out?
Well, I think it was entirely too political. There were a lot of comments from the outside. When people are elected to municipal councils, they're not expected to be civil engineers, and there was a lot of blaming of politicians, which I think was inappropriate. I think they're on the right track. I think it's important that councils and the mayor ask the right questions of administration. There needs to be a regular check-in process and learn from the mistakes. I'd also say this issue is not unique to Calgary. They might be suffering at the moment, they're not in the headlines, but there are cities across Canada that have 100-year-old pipes that could break at any time. And I think it's a learning for everyone. They need reports from administration, they need to do their engineering reports, and they need to prioritize what needs to be replaced on a timely basis.
John, to read certain newspaper columnists in the wake of Tuesday's meetings, Calgary's new city council wimped out. How surprised are you David Duckworth was not fired?
I'm not surprised, Michael. You know, it's not up to Rick Bell to decide who should and shouldn't be fired at Calgary City Hall. You know, as I read the results of the independent panel report, Michael, it's quite clear that the information that the City of Calgary engineers had didn't percolate up to the political level and was never brought to the attention of the then mayor and then council over that 20-year period. So what we have here, Michael, is a bigger problem, and that is in various jurisdictions, both municipally, provincially, and otherwise, you have administrations essentially running things without letting the political overseers know what's going on. And that is a much bigger issue And it's very difficult for elected representatives, for the mayor and councils, to really get a grip on what's happening at the operational level when they don't, as Chris said, when they don't have the expertise, and especially when the information is not being shared with them. So I don't think it was necessary to fire the chief administrative officer. He clearly wasn't aware of what was going on. And I think what's most important is what they're doing right now, and that is trying to fix the problem so it doesn't happen again.
Chris, on a political level, what now rests on the shoulders of this new council moving forward on the water main file, especially if it ruptures again before a parallel line can be completed, because Mayor Farkas maintains it's a ticking time bomb.
Yep, they have to dedicate resources to that. They have to be open to it. I think as quick as the provincial government was to blame the municipality and previous politicians, the issue really is, do municipalities have sufficient resources to maintain the infrastructure? And they've basically, funding to municipalities has declined about 50% over the last 10 years. Funding needs to go to municipalities. Infrastructure money used to come and now has been cut, and that money needs to be provided. It's going to be very difficult for municipalities across Alberta to make careful decisions and decide which infrastructure gets funded. In Lethbridge, it's bridges, and our roads, but in other places, I think we definitely have 100-year-old pipes in Lethbridge, and definitely other cities have 100-year-old pipes. This is not unique to Calgary. Municipalities don't have sufficient funding to address all those needs, and that needs to happen.
John, you mentioned previous councils a moment ago where accountability is concerned. How do you think Naheed Nenshi, as a former mayor, has fared in this whole accountability conversation? And NDP leader has certainly been on the radar of the Smith Government Caucus in its assessment of the water woes.
Well, of course, that's because they're worried about Naheed Nenshi and the NDP, because he and the NDP are the only threat to their governance. I just thought it was a political smear by Danielle Smith trying to equate Naheed Nenshi with the water main problem in Calgary, when the independent panel report clearly stated that the information that this water pipe needed to be inspected, that information was never brought to the attention of the previous mayor and councils, including Mayor Gondek and her council as well. So, but that's politics, Michael. And, Danielle Smith is a very good politician. And, she was just trying to get a jab in on Nenshi while she had the opportunity.
And Chris, to what degree do you see this as a lingering issue to contend with for Naheed Nenshi as NDP leader, and the next Alberta election maybe looming in the not too distant future?
These issues come and go. I think the more important issues, can easily blame Danielle Smith for a lot of things that have gone on since the UCP have been in government. So, the degradation of the health system to begin with. And, so there's lots of blame to go around in politics. I think these games are going to continue until we have an election.
And maybe as a final thought, John, do you see the Alberta government having more of a hand in these types of municipal issues where you have a major rupture of a water main?
Well, they don't have the expertise, Michael, but, as Chris said earlier, they could provide more additional funding to help municipalities with municipal infrastructure, whether that be water mains, sewer lines, roads, or bridges. So in that way, the UCP government could be useful. But, we're going to have the provincial budget coming up in the next month, Michael, and the UCP government is going to be really strapped for cash to increase funding for municipalities. But that is one way that the UCP government could actually help municipalities in Alberta.
Okay, gentlemen, we have to leave it there. Great to see you both. Thank you for this.
Thanks, Michael.
Thank you, John. Thank you.